Dragon Ball Lao Su is the god of destruction. Chapter 281-300. Chapter 281. A weird scene. The god of destruction watched from the side, and Whis had no choice but to let him go. The god of destruction thought that he would definitely not be able to do anything, but just stared at the movements of the two people without understanding. But, after a short while, the god of destruction saw Lila's clothes being tugged fiercely in Ruini's hands, and Ruini's beard was also held in Lila's hands. The two just held their heads up and the other hooked their bodies, and they confronted each other in a weird way. Neither of them let go first. The god of destruction sighed, and let them go without saying anything. As for the two here, they looked at each other, let go of their hands in tacit understanding, and continued to fight again. After a short while, the god of destruction took another look at the two of them. Ho! Good guy. Ruini's tail is in Lila's hand, and Lila's proud pink hair is also in Rui's hand. The momentum around the two is more and more fierce, but this time there is no idea of letting go. With a wave of his hand, the god of destruction was about to persuade the two of them loudly, but he never thought about it. His nose suddenly itchy. The god of destruction covered his nose and tried to restrain himself, but it was inevitable. Ah, puff! A sneeze came from the god of destruction's mouth. He rubbed his nose and said to Weiss, "I can't help it anymore." "Sorry." Then he squatted down and rubbed his nose. Weiss couldn't help frowning. He looked in the direction where the god of destruction sneezed, which almost frightened Weiss enough. That direction was directly where Ricky and Layla were fighting. Weiss was stunned, looked at the god of destruction who didn't know it, and turned around helplessly. When Weiss turned his head, Ruini and Layla were not letting go at this moment. Suddenly they felt a wave of energy coming towards them. They both let go and were about to flee to the side. Still late. When Weiss turned around, he saw the scene where the two women were overturned by the energy wave. He watched the scene where the energy wave was about to attack them, and sighed helplessly. Weiss took up his scepter and opened the light wall, saving the lives of the two. Looking at the small scratches on the arms of the two people in front of him, he frowned. It seemed that the god of destruction was going to be unhappy again. Just as he was opening the light wall, Weiss looked at the energy fluctuations, and for some reason suddenly remembered the past when the god of destruction accidentally sneezed, and the energy fluctuations directly destroyed the glowing sun. Returning to his senses, Weiss looked at the two women who were only slightly injured but not seriously injured. He couldn't help thinking, isn't it really so charming? These two women are not only beautiful but also very strong. Why haven't I met them? Such a woman, alas. Just after thinking about it, the energy fluctuations also stopped. Weiss turned back with a gloomy face. He was startled by the god of destruction who stood up from a distance and silently in front of him. He looked at the unhappy face. The god of destruction rolled his eyes. Directly. "Don't be unhappy, your energy wave suddenly hit me, and I was a little stunned. I rushed to help them avoid a blow. It's not surprising that they were injured before. No one is like you. God of destruction." Okay. Looking at the god of destruction, whose face was a little better but still very stinky, Weiss felt that his heart was really getting old. After all, Weiss didn't care about the god of destruction's face, and went straight into the door to find a reclining chair and leaned on it. Only god of destruction is left here to watch. The two women who are still arguing here are in a dilemma. After thinking for a while, the god of destruction had a flash of light. He simply ignored Ruini and Layla, walked through the door, and sat by the garden drinking tea. After sitting for a while, the god of destruction listened to the quarrels coming from outside, and said to Weiss, who was lying on the side enjoying the time, "Is it okay? You can go out and choose to help someone if you want." Weiss rolled his eyes and continued to lie down in another position. The god of destruction shook his head, calmly lifted a teapot and poured a cup of tea into the teacup, then rubbed the teacup with his fingers, and then drank the tea, but his mind drifted to the two quarreling outside. The god of destruction listened to the quarrel between the two, drinking tea leisurely, and then the sudden silence lifted his heart. Why don't these two quarrel? Wouldn't one kill the other? This idea lingered in the mind of the god of destruction, and took root in his mind. growing into a towering tree at a rapid rate. Finally, the god of destruction could no longer ignore the two women by pretending not to hear. He suddenly opened his eyes and was about to go out to check, but he heard the sound of the door opening. Taking a closer look, it turned out that it was Layla and Ruini who came in. Looking again, the two of them were holding hands intimately. The god of destruction looked at the two of them in confusion and shock. Layla was the first to speak. God of destruction, in the future, be sure to treat the two of us well, Tilda. Hearing this, the god of destruction looked at her in confusion. Chapter 282, Guidance. Chapter 282, Guidance. Layla looked at the stunned look on the god of destruction and smiled without saying a word. She shouted to Ruini, who was walking forward and waited for me, then smiled at the god of destruction before walking forward. When the god of destruction looked, she was already arm in arm with Ruini, and the two continued to walk forward like good sisters. The god of destruction rubbed his eyes, watching the two women in front of him sparring like glue, completely different from just now, and suddenly felt that his little heart couldn't stand the stimulation. He touched his chest, and then looked at Weiss, who was lying and enjoying the time beside him. He sat up abruptly and looked at Ruini and Layla. The god of destruction suddenly felt a little better in his heart. After all, there was one person who was even more surprised than himself, and at least someone was surprised with him. The god of destruction put down the teacup in his hand, walked to Wes's side, looked at the two over there, and said, "You are also very depressed about the changes of the two of them." Weiss nodded vigorously, rolled his eyes at the two people who were chatting happily over there, and said bluntly, "I am not only depressed but also admire them a little. I really don't know how they managed to scold them for a second. Next second, good sisters." I saw that the god of destruction nodded in agreement, and said silently in his heart, "Women's heart, the needle at the bottom of the sea." Weiss looked at the god of destruction deeply for a while as if he heard the complaints in the god of destruction, and then said lightly, "It's best not to let them know what you think in your heart, or it will definitely start a fight again." Then Weiss closed his eyes and tilted his head to the god of destruction who was sitting on the side. "You continue to speculate, I need time to accept this reality." After speaking, Weiss turned his head to the ceiling again, and the god of destruction drank the tea he picked up from the side, watching Rini and Layla standing together, smiling from time to time. Thinking about the two of them fighting in my mind again, I couldn't help shaking and shivering. After a short while, Weiss opened his eyes and looked at the god of destruction, who was still looking at the two women in surprise. "Why are you so dead-headed? Are you not afraid that your little heart can't take it and then die of surprise? And I think the most important thing is, aren't you afraid that the two of them will see your gaze and then one will think to look at him again, the other will think to look at himself again, and then they fight again, and that's the same as just now the same." The god of destruction shook his head and silently said, "I won't be surprised, my body is very strong and healthy, and they haven't fought yet, haven't they?" Weiss was stunned, touched the god of destruction's head, and when he was about to go wild, he withdrew his hand and reminded him, "If you follow my words, you should just take both of these women, anyway, get along this way. It's okay. Moreover, these two people are big beauties, you can enjoy the beauty of the boy." The god of destruction pursed his lips, and looked intently at the two women who were not talking. Weiss scratched his head when he saw him, and it was not good for him to make irresponsible remarks. On the other hand, Layla and Ruini looked back at the god of destruction and Weiss looked at them intently and laughed. Layla looked at Ruini, who was a little shorter than herself, and said, "I've already become a god, so you're not at all curious about why I didn't fight with you at that time, but instead fought with you with bare hands. I'm just as concerned about not daring to do anything with me." Ruini took a bottle of water from the side, opened it and took a sip, then looked at Layla and said, "PFF, you still ask me such a childish question, it must be the problem of my whip, that whip is not ordinary. And of course I know I can't get along with you, I'm not a fool." Layla hooked her lips when she saw this, propped up the table with both hands, and lifted her body back, freeing one hand to ruffle her hair. Ruini sat on the table generously, looked at Layla, and walked over directly. As a result, there was only a little gap between the two of them. Layla moved her body back, looked at Ruini's bored look, hooked her chin and said, "Why didn't we? Let's talk about something interesting." Ruini smiled, and imitated Layla's appearance and raised her chin. "Okay, I can't ask for it." Both of them paused, then tacitly put down the hand that raised the other's chin, covered their stomach, and laughed. Layla was the first to stop her laughter. She looked at Ruini, who was still laughing, and said softly, "It's about cultivation." I saw Ruini abruptly stop her laughter, and walked towards her with shining eyes, with her tail wagging behind her, which was extremely beautiful. "Layla, I don't know much about cultivation. I don't have as much experience as yours, why not? Can you give me some pointers?" Ruini tugged up her drooping hair and slowly twisted it around. Layla watched her movements, went straight forward, touched her head, then rubbed her chin in thought. Chapter 283. Get the practice set. Chapter 283. Get the practice set. Ruini just watched Layla stop moving, and without being a little impatient, she asked anxiously, "You don't want to teach me? Why don't you want to teach me? What did I do wrong?" Layla raised her head to look at Ruini, stretched out her hand and rubbed her head, and said with a tangled face, "But many of my exercises were taught to me by the god of destruction. If I teach you, it's his. It would be unfair not to tell him about the exercises. But if what I teach you is a practice method created by me, the effect is far less than that of god of destruction, so I am a little confused about what to do." Ricky rolled her eyes, thought for a while, and reached out her finger to suggest that Layla put her head in her ear. Layla complied, only to hear muffled mumbles from Rinny's ear. "You said I'll go to the god of destruction and ask him to practice his exercises, okay?" These are the words from Ruini, who was speaking in a low voice. "Your method is feasible, but god of destruction shouldn't give it to you, right?" Layla replied in a low voice. After getting Layla's approval, Ruini smiled, slyly like a stealing kitten. She looked at the god of destruction and smiled, and then smiled at Layla, indicating that she wanted to act. Layla looked at Ruini's smile, but smiled helplessly and tolerantly, wrapping her arms around her and waiting for Ruini's next move. I saw Ruini's eyes rolled and walked gently in front of the god of destruction, suddenly reaching out to cover the eyes of the god of destruction. After the god of destruction said her name indifferently, he sat down gloomily. The god of destruction looked at Ruini, who had changed her previous strong style, and wondered what happened to her, but after Ruini made the next move, he knew it, but these are all things that happened later. Ruini looked at the god of destruction in front of her with no expression on her face, but she could still feel the slight doubt in the god of destruction in his eyes. Ruini smiled secretly, and then took the hand of the god of destruction. Although she received a look of horror from the god of destruction during this period, Ruini still carried on the action firmly. "God of destruction, you give me one of your exercises. I'm so weak, I want to become stronger so that I can be with you. Okay no okay well, it's a big deal in the future. I'll just listen to you, okay?" After talking, Ruini picked up the hand of the god of destruction and shook it gently. That look can be described as a complete little woman. Sitting beside Weiss, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. When Ruini came over, he was acting like a spoiled child, but this doesn't want to be Ruini's style. Then, after becoming good friends with Layla, his personality can also change. Having said that, Ruini's eyes widened, pouting at the god of destruction and blinking slightly. After not getting an answer from the god of destruction, Ruini pouted, turned her head, looked aside, and said to the god of destruction, If you don't give it to me, then I will annoy you every day. Don't let you go to other women, The god of destruction twitched the corners of his mouth. He was about to say to Ruini to stop making trouble. He was not used to Ruini's tone. Ruini took his hand again and said coquettishly to him again, "I know I was wrong before, but people's mistakes can always be corrected. Just give me a chance. You look Sister Layla is stronger than me. You are willing to teach her, but you are not willing to teach me. I am a little unhappy. You are a big badass, and a stinky badass who doesn't understand style. The corners of the God of Destruction's mouth twitched even more. He looked at Ruini in front of him, rubbed his eyebrows, took out from the cabinet in front of him, and then took out a training book of his improved version of the Destruction Light Cannon. Take it out. Immediately after touching the familiar lines on it, he reached out and patted Ruini's shoulder, who turned her head away without looking at him. After Ruini turned her head back, she handed her the training set in her hand. Ruini took the training set with a look of surprise, and said thank you to the God of Destruction. Layla, who was standing behind them, rolled her eyes, walked to Ruini's side, bowed to the God of Destruction, and said, "Let's go first." Then he pulled Ruini's collar and motioned her to follow him. Ruini looked at Layla in front of him and asked, "Where are we going?" Layla said without turning her head, "Where else can I go? After taking the exercises, of course I have to practice." "Could it be that you still want to practice here? How do you practice here?" After talking, Layla turned back to Ruini with a look of hating iron and said, "Oh, I really don't know why you are so stupid all of a sudden. Forget it, let's go, follow me to my realm King Sheng, to help you practice." Ruini nodded and asked in confusion, "What does your Zhuang star look like?" "It's blue, there's snow everywhere, and it's not very popular. This will help you cultivate." "Oh." Rini said this obediently and followed Layla to her realm. Chapter 284, Find Bulma a Try. Chapter 284, Find Bulma a Try. God of Destruction and Weiss watched the two women finally leave. For some reason, they breathed a sigh of relief for no reason. The two looked at each other and said in unison, "Finally gone." After saying this, the air was suddenly quiet for a few seconds, and the God of Destruction and Weiss said in unison, "It's a coincidence, we all say the same thing." Later, I found out, as if to verify, "How do you learn to speak from me?" The air was quiet for a while, and the God of Destruction broke the silence first. "Haha, Wes, our tacit understanding is really not a cover." After saying this, the God of Destruction looked at Wes, and Wes also looked at the God of Destruction in a sense, but the two suddenly noticed that both of them looked away with a smile in their eyes. The God of Destruction looked at the smallpox and stretched his waist, and then said to Weiss full of fighting spirit, "Anyway, there is nothing to do here, so why don't we go to find the next Super Dragon Ball? This will also allow us to take the time to avoid those two women. I don't want to see two women squatting in front of the house as soon as I get home, it doesn't feel good." Weiss nodded in agreement and asked back, "You said so, but where are you going to find this time? Are you going to go to the next planet?" "No, you are not going to hold me to go to planet by planet again. Looking for it." After looking at the God of Destruction and nodding earnestly, Weiss looked at him in horror, and then said, "Is that too slow? God of Destruction, listen to my advice, it is really slow, let's think about it. Any other plan?" The God of Destruction glared at him and said with a blank face, "Could it be that you still have a way? You can't miss any of the ways to meet Dragon Ball if you find them one by one, don't you understand?" Weston paused and was choked up by the God of Destruction, so he had no choice but to say, "I think about it, in fact, it should, there is probably a plan." Before the words were finished, the God of Destruction had already opened his mouth to interrupt him. "If you can't think of it, let's find it planet by planet, so it's slow, but you won't lose or miss any chance of a Dragon Ball. If you really miss it, I'll see how you can recover it." When Weiss was choked for the second time, he glanced at the God of Destruction fiercely inwardly, and then silently thought, "I really want to swear gracefully." The God of Destruction glanced at Weiss, as if he had an insight into his inner thoughts, and without saying a word, he turned around and was ready to pack up his search for Super Dragon Balls. As soon as he turned around, he heard Weiss scream in surprise. "Oh, God of Destruction, I think we can go to Earth." "You think, since Bulma on Earth can find the Dragon Balls of Namek, then change your mind, can he find Super Dragon Balls?" Seeing the slightly puzzled expression of the god of destruction, Weiss opened his mouth, swallowed the saliva secreted from his mouth because he spoke too fast, and said again, "Come on, let me explain it to you in another way. You see, if he has a way to find the Dragon Balls of Namek, why is his method not suitable for finding Super Dragon Balls? So I think we should go to the Earth and ask, if it is true." I said if that solution is really feasible, then don't we save more time? In fact, why don't you think about it? The god of destruction froze when he heard this persuasion, and put down what he was holding. Turning his head to face Wes and then watching Wes touch his eyebrows, carefully thinking about whether this plan can be used. Bulma's solution is indeed to find Namek's Dragon Ball, but what if that solution is not suitable for Super Dragon Ball? But I don't know if it is suitable or not. However, Bulma's identity is the daughter of the Capsule Company and she is a talented girl in mechanics. In this case, maybe she can really use her method to find Super Dragon Ball. If you really can't go by yourself, then I will definitely die of guilt. If I succeed, then. In this way, we will save a lot of time to look for it, and we can save more time to do our own things. If we can't, we have nothing to lose, and it's better if we can. The god of destruction thought for a moment in his mind, and felt that this plan of Westy was really good, killing two birds with one stone. Anyway, he and Weiss were going to find one planet after another. But if it doesn't work, isn't it a waste of time? Seeing the slight sway on the god of destruction's face, Weiss knew that there was a drama, and he said lightly, adding another fire, "If it doesn't work, take going to Earth as the first step in our search for Super Dragon Ball, and then going to other planets to look for it doesn't get in the way, does it?" God of Destruction was taken aback for a moment, added this step to his own experience, and finally found that it was not impossible. After thinking about it, the God of Destruction looked at Wes, who stood up, and nodded lightly, motioning him to go to Earth. Wes smiled and replied and then immediately took the God of Destruction and went to Earth with himself. And LT, title and GT, through Dragon Ball, I am Beerus_text, Chapter 281 Chapter 300, .txt and LT, title and GT. Chapter 285, Meeting Son Gohan. Chapter 285, Meeting Son Gohan. It does take some time to get from Destroyer to Earth, and Destroyer figured out who he should meet there. When he thinks of Earth, the first thing that God of Destruction thinks of is his apprentice, Son Gohan, and he smiled casually. "I don't know how this kid is practicing now, I hope it's not too bad, just don't lose my face." Although he thought so in his heart, the God of Destruction felt a burst of warmth in his heart when he thought of Son Gohan, and he couldn't wait to see Son Gohan. After all, he is his apprentice. Now let's see how he has cultivated, but don't cultivate well. That would be a waste of his own training for him. The God of Destruction decided where he was going, looked up at Weiss and said, "Let's go to Son Gohan's place to see how he's cultivating. If he's finished, just show me a few tricks and let me know that he's here now." "What realm is it?" Weiss glanced at him, and changed the flight path. And on the Son Gohan side, he is rubbing his head against his father, Sun Wukong. "You just accompany me to train Tilda, it's been a few days. My strength is definitely stronger now, don't you want to know what kind of realm my current strength has reached?" Sun Wukong put one hand on his head and said impatiently, "I am not at all. Not at all. Not curious. You can find an open space to practice on your own, I am busy. Don't disturb me." Sun Wukong was not discouraged when he was rejected, and continued to nudge Sun Wukong little by little to let him train with him. He has already thought about it. If his father doesn't agree, then he will stick to him until he agrees. Anyway, isn't he annoying himself? Then if he sticks to him, he will definitely impatiently train with himself to stop sticking to him. Thinking of this, Sun Wukong secretly smiled. He looked at the Monkey King in front of him, and smiled even more happily. To the extent that Sun Wukong sneezed at him, he glared at him. After 2 or 3 days of hard work, Sun Wukong couldn't take it anymore. He raised his hand to express his surrender and was willing to train with him. Sun Wukong jumped up with joy. He stood up straight, his hand compared to the height of Sun Wukong, and cheered. Dad, you see that I have reached your chest. Haha, I have grown up. Sun Wukong looked at him helplessly, then gave him a violent chestnut with his hand, and said leisurely, what a quarrel, you're only 13 years old, you've grown up. Aren't you just a little stronger than before, don't you kid? Foolishly. Sun Wukong covered his head with an unhappy face and retorted weakly, humph. How can I? I'm obviously grown up now, and people praise me that my cultivation talent is better than yours. I'm stronger than you were back then. Many times. You're just jealous of my talent. Slightly. Sun Wukong rubbed his hair, looked at Sun Wukong and said with a grumpy face, the training you said, come, hurry up, get me ready to go sunbathing. Sun Wukong laughed and shouted loudly, now I'll show you my strength these days. After the words fell, Sun Wukong rushed up. He looked at Sun Wukong's somewhat surprised eyes and smiled, and kept attacking Sun Wukong. As for Sun Wukong, because of the sudden attack of Sun Wuhan, he was caught off guard, and Sun Wukong began to keep dodging the attack of Sun Wuhan. While dodging, Sun Wukong was secretly amazed at Sun Wuhan's strength. Obviously, he didn't have so much strength a few days ago, but today his strength has greatly increased. This talent, I have to say that I have inherited my ability tilde. Sun Wukong just lost his mind for a while, and his body suddenly noticed that a very dangerous thing was attacking him. Sun Wukong shook his head and saw Sun Wukong's attack as soon as he turned his attention. He narrowly escaped the blow, looked at Sun Wukong's annoyed expression, and said angrily, if I don't recover, you will beat your father to half-death. Saying that, Sun Wukong rolled his eyes and went straight to call Piccolo. Unexpectedly, as soon as he opened his mouth, Sun Wukong attacked even more fiercely, and Sun Wukong hurriedly grabbed the thing in his hand and flew up. Later, in the eyes of others, it is a picture of a little monkey chasing a big monkey, just saying. The creatures in the places they pass by are not dead or disabled. Sun Wukong glared at Sun Wuhan angrily, seized the opportunity to give him a blow. Sun Wukong immediately backed away, and as soon as he looked up, he saw that Sun Wukong had made contact with Piccolo. Sun Wukong gritted his teeth and didn't attack at all, just waiting for his father and Piccolo to have an unfair one-on-two with him. In this way, the father and son were leaning against the stone wall and quietly waiting for Piccolo to arrive. Hey, I'm here, how about it, hurry up. A voice came from the air, and it turned out to be Piccolo. Sun Wukong and Sun Wuhan both smiled in unison, counting silently in their hearts. 3, 2, 1, start. So, a new round of battle begins, and the difference from the last time is that this time it's a battle of 3 people. The god of destruction and Weiss just saw this scene when they first arrived. Sun Wukong discovered the god of destruction with sharp eyes, and immediately abandoned the battlefield, shouted a master, and rushed over. The god of destruction touched Sun Gohan's head and felt very relieved. Chapter 286. Eager to try. Chapter 286. Eager to try. At first, God of Destruction hadn't paid attention to it, but now, when he looked at his apprentice, his heart filled with pride. It seems that there is a saying that is true, the dragon begets the dragon, the phoenix begets the phoenix, the son of the mouse will dig holes, although this guy is not his son, but there is a saying in the human world called, one day as a teacher, life as a father. So he can be regarded as half of his son. Besides, he has taught this guy his unique skills, but looking at some of his changes now, I feel quite satisfied. As his disciple of God of Destruction, of course, he must be the elite among the elites, so as to be worthy of his face and identity, and his own father is also a respectable person, so he must be a good seedling. Teacher, your body is obviously much stronger. After speaking, he squatted down and fondly touched Sun Wukong's face, with that expression as if he wanted to give the whole world to this child. It's really surprising, who would have thought that the ruthless god of destruction would be so gentle with a child, and the feeling of wanting to hold the child in his hand would be surprising to anyone, even if it was his temperament. Change can't change so fast. Could it be that there is some magic in this child? Even if they accept an apprentice, no one can think of the high-ranking god of destruction, since he is not stingy with his gentleness. Thank you, master, all thanks to the master's teaching. Sun Wufan's cute voice came out, which made people feel very comfortable, and he was small and cute, and he was really likable. Nothing can be done. The god of destruction is naturally even more delighted when she sees it, and she feels more and more that she is picking up a little treasure boy. This is probably the most correct thing she has done recently, right? Thinking of this, the god of destruction's eyebrows couldn't help, and he raised his eyebrows twice, because he squatted down, so his posture also made people feel ridiculous. The god of destruction himself may not have realized the seriousness of this scene, but it is not necessarily in the eyes of others, including the two who are currently on the scene. The reaction of these two can no longer be described as stunned. What they encountered today really refreshed their three views, especially the legendary worldview, which has come to the point of collapse. Yes, Sun Wukong and Piccolo were stunned at first, but this stunned child was straight for a long time. When they finally returned to reality, they suddenly realized what they should do. Especially Sun Wukong. No one can understand his thoughts at this moment. His son can become the apprentice of the person in front of him, which makes him feel very proud. After all, the world is so big, but no one can worship the apprentice in front of him. Not to mention what a great honor it is to be his apprentice. First of all, looking at such a big world, his son will be able to walk sideways in the future. And seeing this situation now, I know how much the adult in front of me dotes on his son. So this son's iron rice bowl is secure. If you do it well, you will be able to run wild in the world in the future. After all, the god of destruction has the backing. If it is better, it will be endless. While Sun Wukong thought about it, he came over with Piccolo and bowed to the god of destruction. Master god of destruction, I was busy standing and fighting just now, and I didn't notice your arrival. No, I didn't greet you. Please forgive me. It's okay. The god of destruction said this indifferently, but without raising his eyelids, he still looked at the little guy in front of him dotingly, which made the two of them even more incredible. Sun Wukong's heart is even more complicated. The god of destruction in front of him, the strength is needless to say, seeing his son become his apprentice. Of course he is proud in his heart, but he is not completely blind worship, because he is also a man in his heart. A person with his own bottom line. As a winner, he always has his own principles. Anyone who sees a powerful person wants to challenge it. After all, it is a good thing. If you succeed, you will prove that your efforts are not in vain. If you fail, it will only prove that you still need to work hard. So Sun Wukong just got up and his heart was full of war, and he felt that it was time to challenge him again today. For a person who respects strength, every time he sees the powerful strength of God of Destruction, he wants to try it, but he never succeeds. Of course, this can't frustrate his courage. After all, he is also a person who has been wandering around the world for so many years. In the eyes of others, he is also a particularly powerful expert. He has never encountered any opponents, so he may feel that he is invincible in the world, and then give him such a high level. In fact, he never felt that he was the number one in the world, and he never arrogantly showed off how capable he was to others. Perhaps this is what he admired more about himself. Thinking of this, he directly invited the god of destruction to discuss, and the god of destruction was about to speak when suddenly there was a roar from Chi-Chi. Chapter 287, Food. Chapter 287, Foodie Weiss. The god of destruction is of course complicated. In fact, his heart is very willing to take on challenges. Although he is full of disdain for many things, in the past, those who tried to challenge him over their own strength were beaten by him to the point that they were no longer capable. Come back again, those guys are really annoying, they don't have any ability, they know that they come to bother him all day long. So from now on, he hated those who were overly self-sufficient. He tried to be a hero all day long, but in the end he became a scumbag. Then who could he blame? But for the Sun Wukong in front of him, he is indeed an exception. The first reason is that he knows that the person in front of him is a very competitive person. To be honest, of course, his strength is still there. Although he is not as good as him, in the end he is also in this world someone who can mix, so, anyway, he is also qualified to challenge him. Although he has failed so many times, he has never looked down on him, because he has always respected this kind of person. He just respects his strength, and there is nothing to hate. The second reason is that he is also the father of his obedient disciple. Of course, he cannot treat him like others. He remembers a word called Iwu-jiwu, because he is very satisfied with this disciple, so he is very satisfied with this disciple's father. Of course, the attitude cannot be bad. After all, I have to thank him for raising a good son, so that I can gain a good apprentice. However, Chi-Chi directly interrupted all his plans at that time, leaving him not knowing what to say, and what this guy wanted to do was beyond his imagination. The next scene directly confirmed his guess. In fact, his subordinates were very loyal and never allowed others to blaspheme him. The next thing that made her worry happened. He wanted to spit out a mouthful of old blood. Others might say that he was bullying others or something, thinking of his dignified god of destruction. He lost face today for no reason, and he couldn't directly punish his subordinates, and his heart suddenly felt very aggrieved. Chi-Chi rushed out and tugged at Sun Wukong's ear, and then said disdainfully, "How can you be so rude? Why are you treating our god of destruction like this? Lord God of Destruction, don't be angry." Quote. The god of destruction couldn't describe his mood in words. The 5 flavors were mixed. The word was suitable. In fact, his subordinates made a face for him, which made him very gratified, but at this moment there is indeed something wrong. Don't be unreasonable. The god of destruction stopped him coldly. After all, this is his disciple's good father. If his disciple watched this scene and had a relationship with him, would it be more than worth the loss for him? If it were the past, those who were overly capable could treat them like this, and he didn't want to have any patience with those who didn't want to, but the current situation would never allow such a thing to happen. Moreover, even if he is not the father of his disciple, the Sun Wukong in front of him is actually a person he admires more. Even though he is arrogant, he still has his own principles. Otherwise, how could he leave? What about today? Hearing the reprimand of the god of destruction, Kiki said aggrievedly, "Yes." Then he turned around very wisely, looked at Sun Wukong apologetically. "I'm sorry just now, please forgive me for being rude." "It doesn't matter," Sun Wukong said lightly. In fact, he was very angry just now. A small subordinate is so arrogant to him, even if he is a powerful person, he can't be rude. He is also a well-mannered person here. He was casually grabbed by the ears. This is something he has never encountered before. If it were someone else, he would have had a seizure. Go up and give him 2 feet and let him experience it. What is called regret, and then is the right way. But now, people have apologized, and besides, the god of destruction is also his son's master, so it's not good to turn his face with him directly, or the relationship that he finally established will be defeated so casually. There is a saying that people are floating in the rivers and lakes, how can they not be stabbed? He has lived for so many years, and the number of times he has been stabbed is not rare. Once it is rude, it is nothing. He is not a stubborn person. He is not so stupid to destroy the overall situation for the sake of saving face, so of course he is very tolerant, showing his generosity. In this case, God of Destruction will feel guilty in his heart, and he will treat his own children a little better, so why not do it? Master God of Destruction, Master Weiss, you just prepared the meal, are you going to eat? I guess you didn't eat anything in the morning. The current scene is very embarrassing, but the foodie Weiss forgot everything as soon as he heard about the food, and quickly agreed. The God of Destruction had to take Sun Wufan's hand and go in to eat, just in time to ask Sun Wukong about Bulma looking for Dragon Ball thing. Chapter 288, Gossip of Sun Wufan. Chapter 288, Gossip of Sun Wufan. Weiss said that Bulma has the ability to find Dragon Balls. God of Destruction, you also know that the Dragon Balls we usually look for are made by the Namekians. Is it possible that you have any wishes? Sun Wukong looked at Sun Wukong with a puzzled look and asked curiously while stuffing the rice in his mouth. What do I want the Dragon Balls of the Namekians? Those little green dragon farts are not. He snorted proudly. Can Bulma really find those Dragon Balls? The God of Destruction asked Sun Wukong with some doubts. Chi-Chi nodded fiercely. Bulma is a mechanical genius. He seems to be able to determine the specific location of the Dragon Balls based on the special fluctuations emitted by the Dragon Balls. High-tech talent. The God of Destruction muttered and nodded secretly. Master, Master. Sun Wukong raised his head, looked at the stunned God of Destruction and waved his hand. People who are usually very positive about eating are now stunned. God of Destruction turned around in a daze. What's wrong? Sun Wukong smiled. Master, why didn't you bring my wife? Cough cough. The God of Destruction, who was about to eat a mouthful of rice, almost spit it out, squinting and staring at Weiss next to him with an annoyed expression. What good have you done? Weiss bowed his head deeply in an instant, looking at the God of Destruction with a grievance on his face, looking very innocent. It's not what Uncle Weiss told me. I just haven't seen the two mistresses. I'm a little curious if they are as good as masters. This time, it was Chi-Chi who sprayed it, and the violent coughing caught Sun Wukong's attention. He quickly patted his back and brought a glass of water over. What nonsense, are you kidding? Sun Wukong immediately reached out his hand and knocked on her Sun Wukong's head. Dad, I'm not talking nonsense. Uncle Weiss said that the master found me two mistresses, both of them are very beautiful. Wes, the God of Destruction roared, looking at Wes as a light cannon. Sun Gohan sold Weiss so smoothly. Weiss hurriedly waved his scepter, wrapped the energy, and went out and threw it towards the sky. The energy exploded in the sky, but the house still remained. It trembled slightly because of the energy fluctuations. How dare you dodge Lao Su's attack? The God of Destruction roared and dodged out, leaving only the three of Sun Wukong's family in a mess. Master God of Destruction, I'll take you to Bulma. Sun Wukong rolled his eyes, but he had to let Master God of Destruction get rid of his anger immediately. Maybe if one can't hold it, he will directly hit the earth. Wouldn't it be the end of the world? Sun Wukong squeezed Sun Wukong's little face and chased after him. When he leaned in front of him, he saw that Weiss was sticking to his small face and rubbing against the arm of the God of Destruction. He looked very strange. When he saw Sun Wukong, he quickly turned around and said, Come on, take me to see Bulma. Saying that, he threw his arm and threw aside the God of Destruction, who was stuck to his body, and hurriedly rushed out. God of Destruction, this way. With a black line on his face, Sun Wukong pointed to the correct position before flying out, but thinking that there was Wes behind him, he couldn't help twitching the corner of his mouth and turned back, only to see that Wes had returned to a cold standing posture with a look of indifference. It's completely two people just now. Master Weiss, do you want to be with us? Sun Wukong smiled and pointed to the front and looked at Weiss curiously. Cough, lead the way. After speaking, he pointed to the front in a serious manner, but he hummed disdainfully in his heart, and his natural coquettish appearance can only be seen by the God of Destruction, and no one else will want to see it. What was I doing when you came just now? Weiss followed Sun Wukong's side and asked word by word in a two-person voice. Sun Wukong was suddenly startled. Hey smiled. Master Wei Zhengying Ningxinwu advised Master God of Destruction not to be rough. That's right. Yes, it deserves praise. Ha ha ha. Weiss patted Sun Wukong on the shoulder meaningfully, showing a sly smile, quite satisfied. Sun Wukong touched the cold sweat on his forehead. It was really not easy, and he didn't know what these gods were thinking, so he couldn't figure it out. Follow up, is it possible that you are looking at the back of this angel? Weiss looked back at the dazed Sun Wukong and shouted with his mouth open and closed, making Sun Wukong come back to his senses. At this time, the God of Destruction was floating in the air, stretching his head to look left and right, blinking his eyes and scratching his head anxiously. What the hell is this kid Sun Wukong talking about? Could it be that I'm lost? The god of destruction just focused on getting rid of Weiss, but he didn't see clearly that he was rushed out. As a result, when he turned around, he couldn't see the shadows of the two of them, so he could only stand there and worry. The god of destruction. Suddenly, Weiss' voice came over, and the god of destruction turned around to see the two of them walking towards him slowly. He couldn't help but secretly smug. It seemed that the god of destruction was still very good, and the direction was actually deceived by himself. Chapter 289, Worthy of Being a Genius. Chapter 289, Worthy of Being a Genius. That's it, God of Destruction. Sun Wukong pointed at a gorgeous-looking one-door villa not far away and said something. The god of destruction glanced at it and glared, as expected of a rich second generation, living in a villa by himself. But as soon as the three of them arrived at the door, they were shocked by the scene in front of them. The two people at the door were chasing me and running around the house. The woman behind her shouted again and again while speeding up, completely ignoring her image. That's not a prince. Sun Wukong pointed at the man running in front of him and swallowed unconsciously, looked at the god of destruction beside him, and twitched the corners of his mouth slightly. It came out, but it wasn't the Bulma the three were looking for. Prince, what are you two doing? The three of them landed on the ground, staring at them with puzzled expressions, and it was Sun Wukong who spoke first. Humph. The prince still had an arrogant expression on his face, closing his eyes and pinching his shoulders, obviously not wanting to say more. It's nothing, nothing, what's the matter, Lord God of Destruction? Bulma smiled and asked the god of destruction and Wes with a puzzled look next to him. I heard that you can create a radar to find the Dragon Balls of Namek, so I wanted to ask you a favor. Weiss stepped forward and looked at Bulma with a smile, looking very kind. Oh, ask me for help. Bulma was suddenly startled, her mouth wide open in disbelief. Weiss nodded and briefly explained the time of Super Dragon Ball. As a result, everyone was stunned again, as if they were all stunned. There is still Super Dragon Ball in this world. Is it also a wishing ball? Sun Wukong asked curiously, leaning over and looking at Weiss. Weiss nodded lightly, but unlike ordinary Dragon Balls, these Super Dragon Balls have existed since ancient times, and they can also make wishes. It's so powerful. What's the difference in the appearance of the structure? Bulma came to stare at Wes curiously, wanting to know more information. Well, Weiss thought for a while, then turned to look at the god of destruction, as if he had to ask for instructions. The god of destruction opened his eyes, glanced at it, and nodded deeply. Compared to normal Dragon Ball, Super Dragon Ball will be larger in size. Bulma looked at Weiss with a serious look on his face, and nodded as if he understood Fidong. That's probably how big it is, the size of the head or the size of the tires of the car. Bulma glanced curiously with some doubts. Well, about the size of a small planet. What? It's true or false? Even the prince's mouth widened in surprise. They had never heard of Super Dragon Ball. Now it seems that the word super is really worth it. Of course, the diameter is 37,196.2204 kilometers. After all, it was made by the dragon god Salama himself, and only the 6th universe has the 7th universe. After speaking, Whis raised his head proudly. Suddenly Bulma disappeared in front of everyone in a flash, leaving only one sentence echoing in the air. Give me 2 hours. This. Weiss looked at him with a puzzled look, but Sun Wukong shrugged his shoulders, and now it seems that he can only wait. The god of destruction was even more poised to sit aside and beat Heish, waiting for news from Bulma. 2 hours later. Why hasn't this Bulma come out yet? It won't be slipping away. Weiss looked at Sun Wukong with a puzzled face and asked. The fan he created was still fanning constantly. Fortunately, the star of destruction was far away from the sun. Otherwise, if you were sunbathing like this every day, wouldn't the skin be dehydrated and abstract? In fact, at the beginning, Destruction God was the closest place to the sun. Every day was like daytime, and it would disturb Lord Destruction's sleep. Finally, one day Destruction God couldn't bear it anymore, and slapped the sun directly to the Milky Way, far away from him. The noon sun is so good, I want to sleep. The God of Destruction leaned lazily on the seat next to him, playing this heish even with tears in his eyes, as if he was about to fall asleep, muttering something in his mouth, as if he was about to snort in the next second. All right, you're done. Suddenly, a clear and pleasant female voice interrupted God of Destruction's prelude to dreaming. She raised her head sleepily, and sat up straight when she heard the word, completed. Body, with a smile on his face. I saw Bulma dashing out, glanced at the God of Destruction, and stuffed the thing in his hand into Wes's hand with a dark face. Here you are. This is. Weiss raised his head curiously and looked at the thing in his hand suspiciously. This is the Super Dragon Ball Survey radar I just improved. You can experiment first. If it is the same material as the Dragon Ball, then it will definitely work. I will study it. After he finished speaking, he left everyone behind and ran away. As expected of a genius. The God of Destruction snatched it away happily, looked back and forth and praised. Chapter 290th, Determine Kosher. Chapter 290th, Determine Kosher. Okay, let's go, the God of Destruction said lightly. He didn't say it was okay, but this statement surprised Weiss. Let's go, Weiss said, looking at the God of Destruction with a haunted look, almost breaking his voice. Yeah, the God of Destruction gave Weiss a white look and replied softly. Go, where to go? Weiss still looked frightened and hesitated for a long time. Since you got the super radar, why don't you go for a ride on other planets? The God of Destruction suddenly smiled, and suddenly he became more energetic. He looked at Weiss and raised his eyebrows, his face full of cunning. For a while, Weiss was stunned, and then after reacting, he looked at the God of Destruction with a look of caring for the mentally retarded. When the God of Destruction saw Weiss' expression, he was a little inexplicable, and glanced at him suspiciously. What's wrong? God of Destruction asked suspiciously. As soon as these words came out, Weiss swallowed unconsciously. How to get to? Dude, tell me, how to get there? Of course. The God of Destruction, as if he knew what Weiss was thinking, chuckled twice and said, but suddenly cut off his voice. Weiss shuddered, and when the God of Destruction laughed, it really made people shudder a little, and, well, the God of Destruction usually doesn't smile. As long as he laughs, basically nothing good will happen. Of course you took me with you. Could it be that you want me to go by yourself? The God of Destruction gave Weiss a sharp snort, then turned his head away with a cold snort. Weiss was speechless and stopped talking. Lord Destroyer, can you wait a minute? I haven't finished Kiki's meal yet. After speaking, he even acted like a spoiled brat at Destroyer, and grievously pulled the sleeve of the corner of Destroyer. But he always felt that the atmosphere around him suddenly cooled down. The God of Destruction had a gloomy face. The cold air turned outwards as if he didn't want money, and disappeared from the sight of several people in a flash. Next time I'm here, Sun Wukong will take me to eat something delicious. Only the reluctant voice of Weiss echoed in the sky, and Sun Wukong, whose jaw dropped in shock. God of Destruction smiled slightly, his eyes widened, and he said, the seventh universe. After 10 minutes, the two of them were swimming in the universe. The two have been out for a long time, but the radar still has no response. 10 minutes passed and the radar did not respond. 20 minutes have passed. 45 minutes passed. Shouldn't I be deceived by Bulma? Weiss said tentatively, as if he had been sure for a long time. No way. Fighting this heish, he also knew that the God of Destruction was irritable. For such an obvious thing, the God of Destruction must not be stupid, and he should be able to see it. After Weiss said this, he regretted it, turned around, and tried to observe God of Destruction's expression. The God of Destruction just kept his face down and didn't speak. The two remained silent, and neither of them wanted to break the silence. His grandma's. Suddenly, the god of destruction shouted towards the sky, which startled Weiss. Weiss originally wanted to ask the god of destruction why he did this in dissatisfaction, but seeing the angry face of the god of destruction, he did not dare to speak. Drip, drip, drip. Suddenly, the radar made a small, almost inaudible sound. Huh, the god of destruction leaned forward and exclaimed. There is a response. Hearing the words of the god of destruction, several other people rushed over excitedly. That's great. Weiss happily leaned up and cheered. The god of destruction should be the happiest one among the others. The god of destruction glanced at the planet he was on. The planet of Kosal. Hey yo, planet Keshul really is where the super dragon balls live. The god of destruction said happily. God, I have been here for so long before, although I have been speculating all the time, I am not sure if there is any super dragon ball here. Weiss suddenly covered his face and thought, full of guilt in his heart. I've been following God of Destruction for so long, but I still can't help. The God of Destruction doesn't have the luxury of taking part in discussions. Since the location of this super dragon ball has been determined, let's. Weiss said tentatively suddenly, but the three words, go back, have not been uttered, but they have been beaten by the voice of the God of Destruction. Broken. Then let's keep looking. Sometimes Weiss and his party really couldn't understand the God of Destruction, so why did they have to insist so much? But God of Destruction didn't care so much, and was about to activate the radar's acceleration system, but was held back by Weiss. Weiss interrupted the God of Destruction hastily. What? The God of Destruction said slightly dissatisfied. Why don't you go back to rest, Lord Destruction? Weiss whispered, and the Destruction God shook his head and said nothing. Weiss was no match for him, so he had to agree. Chapter 291, Disgraceful to the Whole Universe. Chapter 291, Disgraceful to the Whole Universe. In fact, God of Destruction thought that as long as the third one could be found, then the fourth one would definitely be found. After searching for a long time, the radar seemed to have crashed, and there was no longer any response. Looking at the radar angrily, he slapped it with his hands, but Weiss grabbed it with a quick hand. Damn, this thing still needs to be improved. The God of Destruction cursed in a low voice. Really convinced these planets, obviously I have found two, can't I let myself find another super dragon ball? Even just one is fine. Is it possible that I will tell you the location of the Dragon Ball as soon as you lie down on the sabotage star bed? Weiss carefully wiped the radar, and lowered his voice and muttered weakly. What did you say? The God of Destruction turned his head sharply and looked over, and the God of Destruction suddenly felt a smile, waved his hands, and shouted nothing. Gollum tilde. Suddenly, the sound of discord reached the ears of the two, and all of a sudden, Old Weiss blushed and coughed softly as if nothing had happened, but after a while another sound came, and he could only purse his mouth, get closer to the God of Destruction. God of Destruction, I'm hungry. A wailing sound came from his thin lips, piercing the heart. The God of Destruction, who was originally dedicated, shuddered in shock because of this sound, and quickly calmed his pounding heartbeat with his hands, and looked at Weiss next to him with disgust. Eat, 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 sooner or later you will be as fat as Pa. The God of Destruction shouted angrily and ignored him. As a result, such a scene appeared in the entire universe. The God of Destruction held Weiss with one hand and looked at the radar with the other, while Weiss put the scepter aside and concentrated on stuffing the lunchbox into his mouth, looking like he was gobbling it up. It's like I haven't eaten in a long time. Grandmas, shame on the whole universe. The God of Destruction screamed in his heart, his nose sour. In this way, he walked from planet to planet, and the God of Destruction silently counted the number of planets he had passed. 18 planets have been passed, and the radar still has no response. Weiss seemed to suddenly remember something, and kept frowning thoughtfully, without saying a word. Seeing him like this, the God of Destruction next to him asked with some doubts in his heart, What's wrong? What made you hesitate? Thinking. The god of destruction didn't bother him anymore when he saw him like this, and just stood there quietly until Whis suddenly got up and stood beside the god of destruction. Whis said with a dignified expression, "God of destruction, I feel that there should be no other Dragon Balls in this 7th universe. How do I feel that other Super Dragon Balls are not all in the 7th universe?" Quote. Hearing this, the god of destruction raised his eyebrows, was silent for a long time, turned his head, and said to Whis with a dignified expression, "Oh. Whis, what are you thinking? Why do you say that?" Whis folded his chest in one hand and his chin in the other, looked at the god of destruction thoughtfully and replied, "God of destruction, you see, we have searched the entire 7th universe now, and have not found any trace of other Super Dragon Balls. Maybe the other conferences are all in the 6th universe. You said, maybe this is possible." Quote. After listening to his words, the god of destruction also had a dignified expression on his face. After thinking about it carefully in his heart, maybe Shu really has this possibility. Now that he has found 3 Super Dragon Balls in Universe 7, it's still not enough. 4. But after searching all over the 7th universe, there is no trace of them at all. You should go there and look for them. You can't just return empty-handed this time without getting anything. This is not God of Destruction style. Thinking of this, he turned around immediately. The God of Destruction looked at Wes without saying a word, and there was some hesitation in his heart. After a while, the God of Destruction had some thoughtful thoughts in his heart for a while. When the God of Destruction hadn't figured it out yet, Wes spoke and said, "Then let's go quickly. It's not too late. It's important to find those 4 Super Dragon Balls quickly." It was only at this moment when he heard Whis's words that the God of Destruction thought to himself, "Whis was right, hurry up and go, it's not like my God of Destruction style if you don't go." Lowering his head and thinking for a while, the God of Destruction turned his back to Whis and said in a cold voice, "Okay, Whis, let's go quickly, we'll find it soon, and now let's go to the 6th universe to try our luck, better than nothing." Quote. Whis nodded, agreeing with what the God of Destruction said, sat down immediately, controlled the super radar and said, "Okay. Then we'll take a look today, and I won't believe it. I'm afraid I can't find other Dragon Balls." That's it. The two controlled their bodies and flew in the direction of the 6th universe. When the God of Destruction and Wes had not reached the edge of the 6th universe, the God of Destruction found that their bodies began to vibrate violently. However, Wes clenched his teeth with difficulty, and tried hard, and the God of Destruction was also trying to control his body shape. Wes's voice suddenly sounded in the ear of the God of Destruction and said, "Come on, Destruction. God, we hold hands, and it is not easy to be separated." Chapter 292, The Road is Long. Chapter 292, The Road is Long. Seeing the God of Destruction nodded, he grabbed Wes's arm and used all his strength to fly in the direction of the 6th universe. After a meal, the two of them began to slowly stabilize. The God of Destruction looked at the two people's clothes. His brows were wrinkled and he wanted to raise his hands to clean it up, but the God of Destruction was not used to it. Wes said suddenly, "God of Destruction, we are almost there, you are ready." After returning to his senses and nodding, the God of Destruction roared in the direction of Wes. "Okay, we can go faster, as long as there are no accidents." He immediately replied to the God of Destruction and said, "Well, you have to hold on tight, and pack your clothes after a while, or else when you finally land, you too will be naked, then it's not good, I don't want to run naked." Quote. After listening to Wes' words, he said speechlessly, "Come on, what are you talking about?" At this time, Wes still had the mind to joke, "What are you doing to a murderer? Their little heart can't take it anymore." I saw the God of Destruction rolled his eyes helplessly, and said helplessly, "Fuck you, don't do this." Wes started to control the radar and said, "God of Destruction, hurry up and do it." At this time, the two suddenly turned sideways at a high speed, and immediately avoided the damaged meteorite. In this way, when it finally swayed to a slow and steady level, the God of Destruction saw that it was almost there, and with a slight movement of his fingers, the two people's clothes were neatly arranged. Just when the two were about to reach the edge of the sixth universe, the destruction god felt that there was something he didn't remember. When Weiss suddenly said, "God of Destruction, do you know that Champa is here? What if he's not there when we go now?" When the god of destruction heard this, he suddenly remembered that Champa is still practicing in seclusion. They didn't know how to speak yet, and Champa didn't notice their arrival, but Vados immediately sensed their arrival. When Vados was about to go out to meet them, Champa, who was in retreat, sensed Vados' emotions and asked, "Vados, what's wrong? Is there something wrong?" When Vados heard Champa think for a while, he said, "It's nothing, I'll go out for a walk. I haven't had a good time for a long time. I'll go out for a walk and come back." When Champa heard Vados say this, he said, "Okay, then you can go quickly, you will come back after a good turn." Vados smiled and said, "Okay, then I will go, you concentrate on your practice." When he heard this, he adjusted his breath by the way, took a long breath, and thought in his heart, "I don't believe it anymore. When he said that my strength is not good, I screwed his head off and said to Vados." Well, when Vados heard this, he turned around and walked in the direction where the god of destruction and the others were. When the god of destruction and Weiss had already landed around the boundary, the two of them stood on the ground of this planet, and the feeling of landing was really good. Looking at the surrounding environment, I suddenly saw Ba before I got used to it. Das was walking in the direction of the two of them. The god of destruction suddenly said suspiciously, "Why are you here? We haven't notified you yet." Weiss next to the armrest said arrogantly, "Sister. Why are you here? Where is Champa?" After listening to what the two of them said, Vados said excitedly, "Champa is practicing in seclusion, how did you find this place?" Hearing Vados' words, a smile began to appear on the severe face of the god of destruction, and he said, "We are here to find Super Dragon Ball." Vados was puzzled when he heard these words, and his face also showed a hint of confusion. A bit. He opened his mouth and said, "How is the sixth universe?" "Find a few." The god of destruction nodded and continued, "Well, this is a long story. We originally looked for Super Dragon Balls in the seventh universe, but after searching all over, only 3 Dragon Balls, I thought it might appear in the sixth universe." Quote. Vados still has doubts in his heart. What? Not in the seventh universe? How did you find the Super Dragon Ball? A series of questions made Weiss unable to laugh or cry. He raised his lotus finger, pointed at Vados and said, "Aiya, sister. You're just asking after listening to the god of destruction." When Vados heard it, he bowed his head a little embarrassedly, and the god of destruction said indifferently, "It's all right, there's nothing that can't be asked. We went to Bulma to find the Dragon Ball and invented a device that can be used to find the Dragon Ball. Super radar, it can be sensed near the planet." Quote. After listening to this, she was shocked that there is still such an invention. It is not too late for this kind of thing, she has to find the Super Dragon Ball quickly, and immediately said to the god of destruction, "In that case, I will show you around. Does the planet have Super Dragon Ball?" Chapter 292, The Difficult Lord. Chapter 292, The Difficult Lord. After speaking, he looked anxiously at the god of destruction and Weiss. The god of destruction felt that this idea was a good idea, but the god of destruction nodded to Vados and said, "What about the elephant?" Vados shook his head and said, "It's okay, I said hello to him, he has nothing to do, he can do it himself." Hearing Vados say this, the god of destruction nodded and said, "Then okay, please excuse me." Vados blushed and lowered his head and said, "It's all right, it's not troublesome." But when he heard the god of destruction being polite, there was still some desolation in his heart, and he lowered his head and smiled sadly. The god of destruction didn't see Vados' expression, and she was only thinking about things at the time, but Weiss, who was standing beside the god of destruction, saw his sister's expression and could only sigh. I quickly adjusted my emotions, and took the god of destruction and Weiss to search from every planet, but after searching for a long time, there was no response from the radar. After a while, I was a little discouraged, and when I went back to look for it, the radar suddenly sounded in the place of the king of the gods, who was talking viciously and without anyone's eyes. The god of destruction looked at each other. The god of destruction clenched his fist, and Weiss said angrily, "Oh, after a long search, it turned out to be ringing at Kaiwang Shengsheng, which is really bad." Vados turned his head and asked curiously, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Weiss pointed at the orchid and said, "Alas, if you want to get the Super Dragon Ball, you must destroy the planet, or you won't be able to get the Super Dragon Ball. If other planets are okay, but it is such a difficult master, it will be difficult to get the Super Dragon Ball." Vados couldn't help but feel irritated in his heart. The god of destruction remembered the last time he beat the defiant king god, and he actually went to King Quan to file a complaint. In the end, King Quan warned the god of destruction not to go to the sixth universe. When Vados and Weiss saw the god of destruction, they remembered what happened last time, and couldn't help sighing. The three of them suddenly didn't know what to do. Now a Super Dragon Ball, a warning from the Quan Wang, the god of destruction, and several people suddenly began to be in a dilemma. "Never mind, if he doesn't agree with me, I'll just blow up his doghouse." The god of destruction snorted coldly, raised his head arrogantly and said with disdain. But he also overdid it, and I saw that Weiss calmed down again, slightly raised his lips and stared at Wes next to him, even showing a bit of a weird smirk. Weiss was stared horribly by her eyes, only to feel that the cold hairs all over his body were about to stand up, and he couldn't help rubbing his arms on both sides reflexively. "God of destruction, if you look at people like this, people will be shy." As he spoke, he twisted his face in both hands. It suddenly caused him a chill, put away the smile on his face, and secretly clenched his fists. One day, if there is a chance, he must beat this guy hard, and he will feel sorry for him when he sees this face is not flat. "Go talk to that dead old man and ask him to quickly make room for me. Go wherever you like, and leave quickly." After speaking, the god of destruction even waved his hand and sat down in the void of the universe with his legs crossed. "Me." Weiss held out a finger and pointed to himself with wide eyes. It can be seen that the god of destruction closed his eyes and raised his head arrogantly, not only his heart tightened. "Master god of destruction, that old man has bad breath, I don't want to go. I have a cleanliness addiction." He stretched out two fingers and lowered his head, even fiddling with it, as shy as a little girl. For example, now he is completely immune to him and does not eat him. "Okay." The god of destruction stood up directly, put his hands behind his back, and looked at Weiss and nodded heavily. Weston looked at him in disbelief. "Really? Really? Let's go. Let's go to the Quanwang Palace together. I will apply for an angel with Quanwang. If I don't change an angel for me, I will just stop the angel and let the high priest take it back for you." After speaking indifferently, he spread his hands and turned his head to leave. Weston was about to cry but had no tears, so he ran over and hugged God of Destruction's thigh with snot and tears. I'm going, can't I go?" he said, blinking pitifully with misty eyes, like a little pug. "What a shame. I'll go with you." Vados, who was beside him, finally couldn't see it anymore. He pulled Wes up with one hand, looked at him with disgust, and said helplessly, "She really can't do anything about this, brother." Immediately, Weiss' eyes lit up and he smiled, "Just waiting for your words, sister." After speaking, he even cleared his throat, tidied up his clothes and returned to his aloof state, and flew towards Jia Wangxing. Only then did Vados react. She was obviously tricked by these two guys. Chapter 294, Unusual Zhuang. Chapter 294, Unusual Zhuang. Weiss and Vados felt that there seemed to be no way to do it now. They could only hurry and fall here first, so there was no way, and the two of them could only bite the bullet and fall. As soon as it fell, Vados felt that this place was really desolate, and he really didn't know what the hell it was. So Vados looked at Weiss and said unhappily, "Look at what this place is. You are fiddling, why is it still such a place?" Vados is often like this, with a knife mouth and a tofu heart, but this time he really didn't want to. Weiss also knew his sister's character, but he still felt like he didn't want to say anything, so he looked around to see what was going on. They looked at it, and finally Vados thought about it, looked at Weiss and said, it seems to be the King of Kings. Sure enough, it was Vados at the critical time, and she could still know what was going on. When Weiss heard this sentence, he tidied up his fingers symbolically and said, "Oh, why is it still this place?" When Vados heard this sentence, he suddenly felt bad. What was going on, and he didn't know how, he still came to such a place. However, there is no way, this is the place now, so it can only be like this. It turned out that this Zhuangxing is also the planet of the sixth universe great realm King God alone. To put it bluntly, that is someone else's territory. However, now, in this situation, it seems that there is nothing at all. However, when they seemed to feel that something was wrong at this time, Weiss looked at Vados and said, "Sister, why is there no one in this place?" When Vados heard this sentence, it seemed that he still felt that it was not that strange, so he said helplessly, "Oh, don't think about it, maybe at this time, there is really no one." As a result, Vados was silent before he finished speaking. What is the situation? It is really strange that there is no one and no one. Vados still doesn't know what the situation is, but this problem is indeed the situation, and I still don't know a bit. Looking around, Vados suddenly became alert and felt that this place was indeed a bit strange. At this time, Weiss didn't know what to say. How could the feeling here give people a particularly strange feeling? However, even so, they can't sit still. So Weiss gave a suggestion. Otherwise, sister, let's go and see what's going on here, or what's going on here. Vados also didn't know what to do with this, so he could only say, "Well, I guess there is nothing wrong now. Let's take a look at it slowly." As a result, the two of them kept walking, but they found that there was no one there. But there is another strange thing about this place. Not only is there no one in this place, but there is not only no one, but also no popularity. Vados thought for a while and said, "It's strange, why does this place still feel not only empty, but also a bit desolate?" Weiss didn't speak at this time, but he really felt the same way. Weiss felt that at this time, he still didn't say anything, otherwise his sister might still be a little scared. So Vados suddenly asked a question at this time and said, "Otherwise, we should go to the great realm King God to see what is going on in this place." Weiss nodded and said, "Okay. In fact, don't look at what he is like now, but in his heart, he doesn't know what the hell is going on." But just when the two were planning to go to the great realm King God, they saw a familiar person at this time. Vados looked at it, looked at Weiss with a little doubt, and said, "Look, that person is the person next to the great realm King God." Weiss followed Vados's finger, looked at it and said, "Yes, that person is the apprentice beside the great realm King God. Let's go and ask, I guess we can know something." Weiss felt that, as a person beside the great realm King God, this kind of thing can definitely be known. "You're polite," Vados thinks, "why does it feel so mysterious?" However, that person's apprentice still seemed to leave in a panic, and the two felt a little more curious, so Weiss felt that we had to go over and ask, so Vados didn't have time to say anything, and Weiss was in the past. Vados was helpless, his younger brother still really said one thing or another, but when the two passed by, the little apprentice still didn't say anything. So Weiss looked at him and said, "Why is there no one here?" But the little apprentice didn't seem to hear anything. He continued on, and walked on by himself, as if it was something next to him, and he didn't seem to hear it. Chapter 295. The reason for the matter. Chapter 295. The reason for the matter. The little apprentice didn't seem to hear it, and continued to walk, so Vados felt a little unhappy when he saw this situation, so he said loudly, "Stop for me, I am Vados." Weiss felt that his elder sister was still the lion's roar, so that little apprentice really seemed to know. So he raised his head and looked at them, not knowing what to say. After all, it is an angel of the sixth space. Vados looked at the little apprentice and said, "Tell me, what is going on in this place, and why is it so desolate?" The little apprentice stared at them blankly, but when he looked at Vados, he reluctantly saluted, but he still felt particularly unwilling. When Vados saw this question, he really didn't know what to say, and he still felt strange. Just when Vados was puzzled, Weiss said quickly, "What is the situation in your place?" However, at this time, the little apprentice still didn't say anything, and still looked down on him, looked at Wes, and still seemed to ignore it. Vados didn't say anything, but he felt that this question was really strange. In fact, Vados also knows that this problem is not all because he is an angel of the sixth universe, so he may get a little respect. Weiss didn't notice this problem, but said, "Tell me, why is this place like this? How do you feel about this place? It's really strange." After Weiss finished speaking, he looked at the apprentice, not knowing what to say, so he waited for his answer. So Weiss said angrily, "Tell me, what's going on?" But the more Weiss was like this, the apprentice didn't say anything, and as expected, he snorted and left. But I didn't expect that the apprentice was still ignoring the answer and didn't say anything. Weiss felt helpless. What is this all about? Why is it still like this? Weiss was angry and looked at the apprentice, but they still didn't say anything. Seeing this, Weiss felt a little unsure of what to do, so he looked at his sister. Vados said hurriedly, "Hurry up, tell me what's going on." So the apprentice still had the same expression, and Vados was angry. He felt that he didn't know this problem, so he said loudly, "I order you, hurry up and tell me what's going on." Hearing this, the apprentice knew that he was an angel, but he still felt unwilling, but he still said helplessly, "We, the great realm king god and the god of destruction, were injured after the battle, and we are still in a coma." What is going on with this?" Vados said quickly. "What is going on with this? Tell me well, why is it still like this?" In fact, Vados just knew that there was such a war, but still didn't know what was going on. Seeing this situation, the apprentice didn't know what to say. He felt that if he didn't say anything, he probably wouldn't be able to leave, so he said helplessly, "I don't know what happened, it turned out to be almost healed, but now, what's the matter? Still in a coma." When Vados heard this, he really didn't know what was going on, so he looked at Weiss, as if this Weiss didn't know what was going on. So Vados went on, "Now, what's the situation?" The apprentice hurriedly said, "Many people have gone somewhere now, and it seems that the gods of the eastern and western kings have also gone." When Vados heard such a thing, he felt that the situation was a bit bad, but what the hell was going on? The apprentice heard Vados say this, and he knew there was nothing to do, but he didn't dare to leave. So the three of them just stood there, and none of them knew what to do. Weiss went over and said quietly, "What the hell is going on here?" Vados thought for a while, but he didn't know, so he thought about it and said, "What should I do? Should I let the god of destruction come over?" This question, no matter how it is, there is still his problem. After hearing this sentence, Weiss didn't know what to do. In the end, he could only say, "You think this matter is really related to the god of destruction?" After saying this, Vados didn't know what to do, so the apprentice said, "You have nothing to do, if not, I will leave." After hearing this, Vados felt that the apprentice still couldn't leave, and said, "No, you have more important things." The apprentice gave him a roll of eyes, although he felt particularly unwilling, but there was really nothing he could do. Who would make someone an angel of the sixth universe? However, Vados said helplessly, "Well, let's go, Wes, and see if the god of destruction is willing to come." She was still a little afraid of the ability of this god of destruction. Chapter 296, To be Steady. Chapter 296, To be Steady. So Vados hurriedly said, "No, the god of destruction will definitely not come over. He will be angry by then. What if you destroy it?" When Weiss heard this sentence, he didn't know what to say. This is also possible, but it seems that there is nothing left now. Weiss looked at them and said, I know that too, but at this time, it's just a matter of trying. But at this time, Vados still said helplessly, let's see if you can talk about this apprentice, see if you can't let him give up, if you can. Don't bother Lord God of Destruction. However, in this matter, if you just let Bruce come over, there seems to be no way. But this apprentice seemed to know something, so Vados said, what are you doing? The apprentice heard this. He seemed to have no idea why, but suddenly came to the confidence and said, I'm going to the whole God to talk about the good deeds of the God of Destruction, Lord God of Destruction. What? How could Weiss allow such a thing to happen? But now there seems to be no special way, so he looked at the apprentice and said, forget it, let's let the God of Destruction come over, you don't go. Tell the gods. Weiss must be a guardian now, how could such a thing happen? But he still doesn't know what would happen if the gods knew about such a thing. But the apprentice looked at this place, looked at Weiss angrily and said, HMPH, if, your God of Destruction is there now. The apprentice's words suddenly made Weiss do not know what to say. However, now that Vados is still here, the apprentice still doesn't say anything. So, Weiss quickly and quietly told Vados, Sister, you're still here. Let me see if I can get the God of Destruction to come over. When Vados heard this, he felt a little reluctant to say, why, do you also think that this matter is also blamed on our God of Destruction? I think there must be something else about this matter that I don't know about. In fact, Weiss felt the same way, but the apprentice quickly said, although you are an angel, you can't confuse people like this. Let me tell you, there is no room for negotiation on this matter. Although this apprentice was talking about you, his tone and expression were really not respectful. As an angel, Vados has never been so wronged, so he said fiercely, if I were not an angel, you would definitely kill you. The apprentice didn't expect that he would say this, and he still didn't know what to say. An angel is actually like this. If it is said that this apprentice is really such a strange character, he still opened his mouth and said, well, it turns out that the God of Destruction is beside the great God of Destruction. Are such unreasonable people. Although Vados was angry, he didn't know what to say. He could only say helplessly, anyway, the God of Destruction will never pass. What? When Weiss heard this sentence, he didn't know what to say. Why did he feel that this apprentice still didn't know what to do, but his sister, how could she be so stubborn? So Weiss said quietly, Sister, at this time, if this matter reaches the omniscient can just sit back and ignore it. At this time, Vados also suddenly calmed down, thought about it and said, but, even if this is the case, what should we do? Weiss said quickly, I'll leave it to you, my apprentice. I hurriedly called the God of Destruction over, and then we'll see what we should do about it. Vados sighed helplessly and said, Hey, how can you be sure? The God of Destruction will definitely come. In fact, I also know that, if the God of Destruction knows, the God of Destruction and the God of Destruction, it is estimated that they will have to deal with each other. Quote. Why doesn't Weiss know about this matter? The only way now is to try it, so Weiss said, I'll leave the matter of the apprentice to you, Lord God of Destruction, I'll go and talk about it. Vados had no choice but to nod and say, well, that's it for now, but hurry up. As a result, Vados's words were still not finished, and Weiss just disappeared, so Vados sighed and said, I hope everything can be successful. The apprentice felt that the big thing was bad and wanted to leave, so Vados directly pulled him back. Vados said coldly, don't think about it, you can't leave, all things, wait for the God of Destruction to come over and talk about it. Quote. In fact, after talking about the God of Destruction, this apprentice is still a little scared. He is really afraid of this God of Destruction. He really has the power to destroy everything, maybe even his own. However, now Vados ignores it and just waits quietly for Weiss. Chapter 297, Want to Burp. Chapter 297, Want to Burp. The God of Destruction, alone, suddenly felt that this day was really very long, and it seemed that it was still boring in the mouths of real people. In the sky above the great God King realm, it may be good to see the scenery. So, the god of destruction felt that he should find something to do, but at this moment, a ray of light came over. God of destruction didn't know what was going on, so he passed by with a light cannon. However, what the god of destruction didn't expect was to see Whis' panicked face. The god of destruction suddenly thought, what the hell is going on? So he ran over and said, are you all right? But at the time of eating, the frightened Whis got up, raised his orchid finger and said, hey, god of destruction, why are you still in such a mood? Besides, master is about to die for such a thing. The god of destruction didn't know what to say, but he could only say embarrassingly, yes, I'm sorry, I really don't know. In fact, at this time, Whis didn't have anything to do, so he patted the soil on his body, got up and said angrily, okay, it's okay, master has a great life, how can something happen? The god of destruction seemed to remember something, and quickly looked at Whis and said, why, it's done. Seeing Whis' happy look, the god of destruction felt that this matter was a success. But I didn't expect Whis to say, oh, Mr. Bruce, don't worry about being happy, there is one more thing, that. Whis was speechless for a while, not knowing what to say, but the impatient god of destruction hurriedly said, what's the matter, hurry up. Whis thought for a while, then said helplessly, this, that, what, that is the great realm king god. It is estimated that it will not work. See if you have any plans. When the god of destruction heard the news, he thought it was incredible. He really didn't know what was going on, why it was fine before, and it's what it is now. Looking at Whis like this, it doesn't seem like he's lying, so the god of destruction continued, it's true, why was it still good at that time? Seeing how his little apprentice didn't believe him, Whis said quickly, oh, you don't know, your body is really dying, you don't know, you can't get out of bed every day. The god of destruction finally knew when he heard this. This seems to be true, but how could such a thing happen suddenly? The god of destruction is puzzled, but Whis seems to have no explanation for this matter. In fact, the Daji Wangshan is just a little coma, and he is not as serious as he said. Maybe, the god of destruction really didn't know the situation, so he said slowly, then, what are you going to do? After hearing these words, Whis thought for a while and said, I think it's a very important matter whether to tell the king or the king. What? After hearing such words, the god of destruction was actually a little surprised, but how could this expression hide from his master? Whis looked at the god of destruction and said, why, you don't want to go, in that case, I'll go alone. Although Bruce was curious, he decided to go, so he nodded slightly and said, well, then, let's go together. So, Whis and Bruce went together, but along the way, Bruce felt that this matter was very strange, but he couldn't say why. As a result, when he just passed, before he saw King Quan, he saw Vados dragging a person, and he didn't know what he was doing. Seeing his sister like this, Whis hurried over to the goblin and said, oh, my sister, what the hell are you doing? So he looked at the person under his feet. That person was Jia Wangxing's apprentice, and the god of destruction also saw this, so he smiled and said, what the hell is wrong with this, let him go. When Vados heard this, he was about to let him go, but the apprentice actually struggled and said, it turns out that you all colluded. Hearing this, Bruce really didn't know where such words came from, so he looked at the man in surprise and said, no matter who you are, why do you say this? When Vados heard this sentence, he slapped his hand and said, what nonsense, where is there such a thing? Seeing his sister like this, Whis couldn't help but blurt out, oh, my sister, how can you get married like this? It really worries my brother. Whis has always been like this, and everyone thinks that he is used to it and thinks it is acceptable. But the apprentice didn't seem to buy it very much when he saw such a situation. He looked at them coldly and said, you are so blatant in collusion, I will definitely tell King Quan to punish you. Glancing at Bruce. Chapter 298. Good. I'm a god of destruction. Chapter 298. Good. I'm a god of destruction. How could the god of destruction see the attitude of that apprentice? The god of destruction was angry, his breathing was short, and his brows were furrowed. Whis saw the change in the god of destruction, and Whis thought to himself, God of destruction can't stand this anger. Sure enough, the god of destruction approached the apprentice and wanted to get angry, but in the Wes next to him quickly stopped him. Don't. We are here to solve the problem. You will intensify the contradiction. Think about the super Dragon Ball we are looking for. Don't be angry, your anger is so amazing, the entire universe will be destroyed. Please appease this apprentice first. Whis persuaded the god of destruction. This little apprentice, haven't you seen my power? Dare to talk to me like this, I'm getting impatient. If you didn't hold me, I'd have to teach him a lesson. The god of destruction crossed his hands and put them on his chest. Before, waiting for that little apprentice. Is your great realm king god so weak? After all, he is also a realm king god, who manages the entire universe. How can it be so easy to die? Don't worry, he will be fine. Although I hurt him, it will definitely not cause death. Yes, I just taught him a lesson, I know it in my heart, the god of destruction explained. Vados also persuaded the apprentice, the god of destruction really didn't use a fatal blow on the great realm god. You don't know how powerful the god of destruction is. Once his ultimate trick is used, the great realm king god will not survive. Now, the god of destruction is really showing mercy. Who knows how the great realm king god is not beaten? Weiss nodded quickly, hoping that the apprentice would believe what they said. The apprentice had already decided that they were bad people and didn't want to hear their explanation at all, so he turned to leave. But Weiss got in front of him with a quick step. The apprentice was a little scared, thinking that he was going to be beaten again, and stood there motionless. God of destruction is very angry. If Weiss didn't stop him, he would have died by my hands. The god of destruction pointed at the apprentice. I've been explaining this for a long time, and I still don't believe it. I have to go and file a complaint. Go. We'll all end well by then. Weiss, please don't stop him. Weiss didn't let him go. That little apprentice couldn't do it either. The apprentice complained about the great realm king god. Our great realm king god is usually in good health and has a strong body. Besides, the great realm king god is also capable and strong in martial arts. How could he be injured so easily? It was also because of that time. Injured, cannot afford to be sick, unconscious. As he spoke, he burst into tears, crying in pain. I called all the genius doctors to come over for diagnosis and treatment, and they all prescribed prescriptions, but it didn't work, and I was still in a coma. It's been several days. I haven't woken up all the time. What can I do? Later, the genius doctor had no choice, and after the diagnosis and treatment, they all shook their heads. He cried even more fiercely here. The god of destruction was speechless to this apprentice. The god of destruction sat on the platform with one leg on the platform and the other under it, shaking, listening to the apprentice's description with disdain, and sympathizing with the apprentice. The apprentice started to accuse the god of destruction while crying. It must have been some kind of shady trick that you did to the god of great realm. The god of destruction jumped off the stage after hearing this. When he got down, he was so angry that he walked to the apprentice with a stride. When the god of destruction raised his hand, he really wanted to slap him to death. Whis flew behind the god of destruction and grabbed both hands of the god of destruction. Vados also came to preview, and the two held the hands of the god of destruction. That apprentice had already been smashed to pieces. The god of destruction has never been so aggrieved before, to be wronged and taught a lesson by a little apprentice. Whis quietly mentioned, Super Dragon Ball, in the ear of the god of destruction, and the god of destruction let go. I don't want to waste any more time. Since it was caused by me, then I will go and see what kind of strange disease the great realm king god has. He will die, he can't just die like this. I will go and see and say there might be a turnaround. Although the god of destruction was very angry and aggrieved, he endured it in order to get the Super Dragon Ball. The apprentice cried even more fiercely, and began to shout, the god of destruction is going to kill people. Vados was afraid that the god of destruction would provoke the god of destruction when he heard the apprentice's more embarrassing words, and quickly covered the god of destruction. Apprentice's mouth. Don't let him yell. Squatting on the ground to persuade the apprentice. We have persuaded you for a long time, why didn't you listen to the persuasion? If Wes and I hadn't stopped you, you would have been shot to death by the god of destruction, and you would still be alive to this day. You don't know how powerful the god of destruction is. We didn't mean to kill you at all. It's not good for all of us to report the matter to all God. The apprentice felt that Vados was right and stopped shouting. Weiss continued to reassure him. The most important thing now is to save the great realm king god, and the bell must be tied to the bell. Since the god of destruction hurt the great realm king god, the god of destruction will definitely have a way to wake the great realm king god. Vados was arguing at the side, and the apprentice agreed. Chapter 299. The Great Realm God Who Wants to Burp. Chapter 299. The Great Realm God Who Wants to Burp. The god of destruction snorted coldly and directly asked the apprentice to lead the way. Hurry up, or your great realm king god will die. The god of destruction deliberately frightened the apprentice. The apprentice turned around and glared at the god of destruction, thinking that the god of destruction was really strange. That apprentice knew the name of the god of destruction before, and who doesn't know about someone as powerful as the god of destruction? Maybe that apprentice had eaten the courage of the ambitious leopard, and was not afraid of the god of destruction at this time, or it was possible that he had never seen the true strength of the god of destruction. Whispering while walking ahead, the apprentice thought to himself, God of destruction is amazing, it's not impossible now, so what about me? After all, I am begging for it. Relying on your own ability, bullying our great realm king god, and using sly tricks, I don't believe it, no one can cure you yet. What if you went to see the great realm king god? You are not a genius doctor. Can you still rescue the great realm god king? The apprentice sneered at the god of destruction. Destroyer was so arrogant that he scratched his head. Fortunately, Weiss walked in front of the god of destruction and followed behind the apprentice to avoid the possibility of the apprentice being shot to death by the god of destruction. That apprentice saw that the god of destruction was far away from him, that's why he was so presumptuous. But Vados couldn't listen anymore. He didn't want the apprentice to anger the god of destruction. Vados patted him on the head from behind. Lead the way, there's so much nonsense, and the apprentice didn't dare to resist. This great realm king god seems to be afraid of me, he must be hiding, ha 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 ha, the god of destruction teased. Because it took a while to arrive at the residence of the great realm king god. Suddenly, their eyes lit up, as if they appeared out of thin air. They seemed invisible, and seemed to be enchanted. Vados and Weiss were a little surprised, a magnificent, palace-like castle. The castle is as big as a mountain, splendid and resplendent, with exquisite carvings on the outer walls. Even the doors and windows are huge, and Weiss reached out and touched the very realistic bronze statue next to him, full of praise. At this time, the apprentice had already entered the gate, leaving God of Destruction, Vados, and Weiss behind. The apprentice turned around and saw that they were still behind, so he said to them, "Come here quickly, don't waste your time, haven't you seen such a luxurious building?" The god of destruction could not help twitching the corners of his mouth, remembering the usual costumes of the great realm king. Green to luminous clothes, red sweaters, gilt jewelry, thinking about the architectural style of the palace, it is quite in line with the design of the person who wears red and green. Weiss said to the god of destruction, "This is more in line with the temperament of the great Kaiwang god." The god of destruction, Vados, and Weiss looked at each other and laughed inexplicably, as if only the three of them understood. Finally arrived at the palace of the great realm king god, and came to his sight, the god of destruction was not afraid at all. After entering, there were still a few people in the room, but they saw that the god of destruction was very vigilant and scared. Some guards also entered a state of protection. The god of destruction saw it, and the king of the east and west was also there. The god of destruction saw that they were all there, and gave him a disdainful look. "Yo, two eastern and western realm kings, long time no see. The Eastern and Western realm kings completely ignored the destruction god. God of destruction didn't feel embarrassed at all, he was used to it anyway, and the gods didn't like God of destruction very much. Seeing such a scene, Weiss was filled with the smell of gunpowder, and he was afraid that there would be another conflict, so he fought. Weiss explained kindly, "We are here to save people, not to make trouble. Don't take a very vigilant attitude. Although our God of destruction has great skills, he is not so ignorant of current affairs. I don't want to make things bigger." The apprentice saw the Eastern and Western realm king god, and quickly walked towards them, kneeling in front of them. That apprentice knew that he had done something wrong and should not have brought the god of destruction into the palace of the great realm king god. The god of the East and the West did not hide the boredom and fear of the god of destruction at all. Scolded the apprentice. "What are you going to do? Why did you bring him here? Do you think he has caused the great realm king to be miserable enough? Are you tired of living? You bastard, pull it out for me and behead it." That the apprentice hurriedly explained, pulling the Eastern and Western realm kings to kowtow and begging for mercy. Vados stood up directly. "The king of the East and the West, please calm down. We are not here to cause trouble, we are here to help. You can see that the male god of the great realm has been in a coma for many days, since all the methods have been used. Besides, you also think that this has something to do with the god of destruction. He hurt the great realm king god, so why not let the god of destruction come over to diagnose and treat the great realm king god? Maybe he has a solution." After listening to Vado's words, these people gathered together and discussed in a low voice. The god of destruction swaggered up to the god of great realm, and looked at him lying there. His face was black and his lips were black, and the god of destruction raised his hand and turned it over. The eyelids of the great realm king looked at it. Those few people saw the god of destruction approaching the great realm god and moved his body again. They cared about Vado's face and dared not to be angry. Chapter 300. Devil's Breath. Chapter 300. Devil's Breath. The god of destruction looked at it, and then said to the people around him, "Get out of the way." Looking up at all the people, they were still a little reluctant to leave, so he increased his tone and said, "I'll say it one last time, get out of the way." Although he was a little dissatisfied, he didn't know what to say. Because of the appearance of the god of destruction, he really didn't know how to provoke him. The god of destruction looked at them and said lightly, "Don't worry, I won't do anything, now I'm just going to see what's going on." Everyone couldn't stop them, so they hurried over and said, "Okay, Mr. Bruce." Bruce didn't say anything, hurried over, looked at it, and felt that the world was full of gods, and there seemed to be no problem. But at this time, Bruce felt that it might be nothing. Just when Bruce felt very relaxed, a voice suddenly came over and said, "It's rare, he has the breath of ancient demons in his body." What? When Bruce heard this, he was suddenly surprised, but he still didn't know what to say. In the end, probably just to reassure everyone, Bruce said slowly, "There's nothing wrong." But here, he was still thinking about this matter first, so he said to his own voice, "What the hell is going on here? How can there be an ancient demon?" However, the voice still said slowly and leisurely, "Although it is not very strong, I can still feel it, so you have to be careful." Bruce couldn't help but think, but what's the use of this thing? However, the next voice continued, "Although this breath is still very weak, it is still very strong, so you still have to be careful about such things." God of Destruction didn't say anything, just looked at the ring in his hand, really didn't know what to say. In the end, he could only think, what the hell is going on? However, what makes God of Destruction particularly gratifying now is that this thing is still with him, and he can still hear his voice. Staring at the ring in his hand, the God of Destruction was still a little surprised when he heard it suddenly. The old voice must be him, he would not remember it wrong. It means that this thing is still in his own body. Then, since he knows this matter, is it much easier to do? The God of Destruction glanced at the great realm king god. He still didn't know anything, it was better not to act rashly. However, the voice suddenly stopped moving, and I shouted it several times in my heart but still didn't say anything, and there was no movement around, so the god of destruction felt that it seemed that there was something I didn't know about this voice. Although I looked around, I felt that I still couldn't see anything, but at this time, can anyone else know except me? So the god of destruction asked the voice, what the hell is going on with this? Do you know, or in other words, is there any way to save him? But the person beside the realm god said, isn't there anything wrong with realm god? At this time, the god of destruction hurriedly came out of his memories and said, it's okay, the Kaiwang god is not a big deal. The god of destruction originally thought that he had more important things now, but when he saw the little apprentice who was half kneeling looking at him, full of expectations, he immediately made up his mind. Looking at this situation, the two realm gods originally wanted to resolve it peacefully, but looking at the realm gods lying on the bed, no one knows what will happen next. Master Destruction God. The apprentice suddenly grabbed God of Destruction's foot and looked at him in a panic. The Eastern Realm King God had no good face, and directly pulled the apprentice's hand away. Since the God of Destruction said that there is no big deal, what else did they have to say, and they are not particularly satisfied in their hearts? Could it be that they are so arrogant because they are the God of Destruction? God of Destruction is not like a paw, he was run on just a few words, and although the two were a little annoyed, they still didn't say anything. So the God of Destruction hurriedly asked, but, since you know that he has the aura of an ancient demon in his body, then there must be some way to do it right. The God of Destruction was a little anxious, but there was no sound around. At this time, there seemed to be nothing around. The God of Destruction felt a little angry, so he was about to get angry, but at this time, an old voice came out and said, what is there to solve? Things. The God of Destruction asked this question because he wanted to know if the great realm king god could still be saved. So the old voice said, when the war in the sixth universe is resolved, there is still something left over. You can go and see this thing, it can help you. When the God of Destruction heard this, his heart suddenly tightened, so he pursed his lips and said, okay, I see. So, the voice disappeared again, but it is not the way to let the great realm king die like this now.